So this is somewhat of a follow-up to a video which I made, which was talking about how the warrior archetype, it's not like an optional extra if we feel like that being in our lives, but actually that energy is really important for our healthy development. And somebody asked a question about that, so I'm going to go into it a little bit more in this video about the developmental effects of this archetype in our lives and how it's so important for us to grow and be healthy and balanced. So I'll start with the experience of being a very young baby. And anger at this stage is actually a really important emotion, and this can get missed. So we know from attachment studies that if a child is needing something, they kind of reach out. The reaching out response is the first response. But then if there's a period when their needs aren't met, then they'll start to protest. They'll actually start to get angry, and we all know this, that this happens in babies. But interestingly, if needs aren't met for a sustained period, then this protest behavior can't be continued. It's not possible for a young child to feel the protest or feel the anger that they feel for a prolonged period. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, it has to do with the nervous system at that stage. Actually, you can't really cope with that level of sympathetic arousal. But also, feeling that protest, feeling that anger is a kind of pushing away of the caregivers. And because at that young age the child is entirely reliant on their parents or caregivers, it's not safe to feel the anger, to feel the protest fully. So what often happens if we've had this experience of not having our needs met in a sustained way is we can grow up with a level of anger that is repressed within us from a very, very young age. And that anger actually lives in our nervous system, it lives in our psyche, and it's experienced as a kind of threat. So if we are going around in our adult lives and we're feeling threatened by the world, if we don't feel safe, then it's extremely likely on some level developmentally that this emotion is within our field and it's affecting us. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. The second thing that I want to bring in about is the developmental stage of autonomy. Because so often in popular psychology, people talk a lot about attachment, but autonomy kind of gets missed out. And it's very important at the ages between 2 and 4 that a child is able to separate from their caregivers and feel safe and secure, and then be able to return. And in a way, as we grow up, this separation is kind of ongoing. It's an ongoing theme that we separate more and more from our parents. So the parents need to be able to let their child go away and then come back for this separation to happen for them in a way that they can feel safe. And often this is interrupted. So it can be interrupted. One of the ways, classical ways, is an invasion of the child's space. And it's not necessarily an invasion of their boundaries. It might be like a kind of overholding of the child and not allowing them to separate. And this can really happen, particularly if the parent has developed a strong bond with the child and they're finding it challenging for them to go away, and they can kind of hold on. There can also be this holding in a kind of rigid way when a child is given a strict regime in how to behave and even punished when they don't follow the rules, in inverted commas. This can also create a kind of rigid holding where they don't have that space to separate in a healthy way. And then, of course, it can go the other way where a child is made to separate a little bit too early. And if this happens, there's separation, but there's fear. So it kind of interrupts that process of healthy separation. And of course, this is the root. This is the root of the warrior archetype. When that happens, there's an impact on us as we grow. So we might receive a wound in that area, and then there's a deflation or an inflation in this archetypal energy. But what's really significant is that on an internal level, actually, we usually experience both going on. So there's a kind of internal way that when we grow up with this wound, we feel compelled to obey. It's like we can't say no in a healthy way, but internally there's a kind of internal screw you. There's a rebel inside somewhere, and even if there's a really, really strong sense of not having any power, somewhere inside there's a holding of our will. It's like the will doesn't actually disappear, it's contained, it's inside, it's just turned inwards. So this kind of comes out behaviourally and usually behaving in a very nice way, very friendly way, but then secretly, while nobody's watching, we break the rules. And interestingly, this can play out, of course this can play out in relationship to others, where we feel like we can't say no and set healthy boundaries with people around us, which can have a real impact on our lives and who we can be and what we can claim. But it's also internally. So we are kind of obeying our internal rules or the ways that we are trying to control or set up our life. But every so often there's a kind of rebellion, an inner rebellion, which means that often if we've got a wound in this area, it can actually be quite hard to sustain the habits that support our development or even sustain a healthy working balance. So we might be caught in procrastination or pushing ourselves really hard in our work and then burning out. So if we have this experience, this wound in this area, particularly if it's in the deflated sense, in the sense of feeling powerless, like we don't have very much power, there can be a tendency in our personal development work, in our therapeutic work, to push through, and even seek out therapeutic approaches that are very hard or use catharsis. And when this happens, if we find a kind of outlet like that, there can be a way of catharting. You know, these workshops where people are screaming and shouting and there's a kind of release. And there's an effect on the nervous system. The nervous system feels great and we have a change. But people who know this and who've tried this, and I'm one of those people who tried this years ago, what we experience is that actually that level of empowerment isn't sustained. And we actually have to come back to those release exercises in order to feel balanced. So what is needed to work with this developmental trauma actually isn't a release of emotion. It's a re-perceiving, it's a re-seeing of what we are doing in relationship to ourselves on a continual basis. Because what we were taught by our parents in terms of relationship to this archetype, we now do to ourselves. And it's very subtle the ways that this plays out within. But once we begin to see that, once we begin to see and capture it in the present moment, there can be a release from those patterns that is keeping this energy stuck. And of course, emotions may come up as we do that, they often do, emotions release, but the focus on emotional release isn't the most important thing. It's actually about creating that therapeutic holding environment and having little exercises and experiences that mirror back to us so we can begin to really see what it is that we're doing. So I hope that's not too geeky a video. This video is really for the geeks who want to know a little bit more detail, and if you want a more simple video about the warrior, I suggest seeing the other one I put out earlier. Okay, bye for now.